We are between the Gospels and the book of Acts. Let's review where we are in the biblical story to this point, thinking in terms of what has happened versus what has not happened, or what do they now know? What does a person in the story know, like a Peter or Lazarus, know, versus what is now in suspense because the Gospels have ended? Let's think in terms of 5 things they would have known. Number 1, a person was considered fully right with God through their personal loyalty to Yahweh as opposed to any other God. We have been through this before. This is a point of review for much of the biblical story, but it's vital as we get into the book of Acts. Nothing has changed, in other words. This is the word faith in the Bible, the idea that God would form a covenant with a person so that they could speak of my God in terms of Yahweh. Is where we have come in our story. Thus, there is no need of ritual sacrifice, let's say, or visiting a temple or a tabernacle. This is accommodation language in the religions of that day. All religions spoke about it, about this, and used it. But when it came to being right with God, you were simply loyal to Him in personal faith. Number 2, what else was known? God's people corporately needed to be saved from their sins. What had happened, and this is largely the Old Testament story, the people of the Old Testament, as they grew out of the Abrahamic family into a nation, a country, the Israelites, they started to become disloyal to Yahweh and to worship other gods. And again, we saw this largely through the Old Testament. As we turn to the latest portion of the Old Testament, we heard Elijah say, the prophet Elijah, bemoan the fact that only 7,000 people had not bowed the knee to Baal in the days of the divided monarchy. So this is why the family thus went into exile, and the Old Testament ends with the people of Israel in exile. Some people do come back to the land of Israel, a very small number, but this is how the Old Testament ends. Number 3, again, what do we know so far, or what has happened in the biblical story? Number 3, Jesus has come to explain who God's people actually were. What had happened is the understanding of the character of Yahweh had, by the time of Jesus' arrival, had become so distorted that the people of Israel really did wonder who Yahweh was, or they were not loyal to Him because they had missed His character. So questions, and again in John 19, Jesus said to Pilate, "Why have I come? To," quote, "witness to the truth." Well, this is the truth He's going to witness to, that the person of the Old Testament who was simply loyal to Yahweh, remember Matthew 5 through 7, the personal faith of an individual is what counts. The personal faith of an individual is all you need to be right with the God of Israel. So questions like, and think of all the things that Jesus talked about. Touching a leper, is God offended? Is God offended when you talk to a Gentile woman about becoming a member of Abraham's family? These kinds of things. When Jesus said, "Follow me," in other words, He's asking people to follow His teaching of who Yahweh is and what He wants from the individual. Number 4, Jesus was, again, things that have happened to this point. Jesus was rejected, killed, and resurrected all in one weekend. And again, this will be something that when Jesus speaks of "follow me" in the later portion of His ministry, He's talking about following Him possibly into our own death, because His ministry is pointed, much of the Gospels again pointed, a large quantity of the Gospel material is pointed to the suffering, rejection, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Number 5, and this has just happened as we close the Gospels and begin Acts, Jesus leaves the earth and goes to the heavens. And we are now positioned in the book of Acts to ask what is going on, but this has just happened. He has left the earth with a promise to return to judge the world for its loyalty to Yahweh or lack thereof. So those 5 things have set up the scene for the beginning of the book of Acts. What was not known, or what was now in suspense as we come into Acts? Let's again think in terms of 5 questions. Number 1, they were wondering, again, the best case scenario, a Peter or a Lazarus, Just who was this Jesus? In other words, the identity of Jesus, I think, is still in question at this point. This will take time to develop. Is Jesus just a human? Was Jesus an actual deity that came to earth? Was he a created deity? Was he a non-created deity? All these kind of questions, I think, are going to be in the minds of Jesus' followers as we turn to the book of Acts. We remember the Emmaus disciples walking away from the tomb in Luke 24, and they said, was this, or we thought this was the Messiah who would redeem Israel? So that's the kind of question that we're opening the book of Acts with. Number 2, what was the meaning of Jesus' death and resurrection? Yes, it happened, and we are now going to be in a kind of a mood of suspense as the book of Acts opens, asking, I wonder what that meant to the story of the Bible. We had heard in the Old Testament of a suffering prophet or of a suffering servant, Isaiah 53. But nowhere, no one had ever expected a suffering Messiah. So that question of the suffering, death, and resurrection of the Messiah will now lead us into the book of Acts. What's the meaning of that, in other words? Number 3 in suspense is, what is the timing of Jesus' return to earth? Imagine how odd that would be, where the Messiah comes, announces himself to the world, and then he leaves. So that's the kind of question they will be wondering about, this very odd moment when he says, I am here, and just as quickly says, I am going away. They're going to be wondering about that. Number 4, what is the makeup of the family of Israel? This will largely run the book of Acts. What is the shape of the family of Abraham? Jesus had come to explain again the character of Yahweh and how a person could be fully right with God by simply being loyal to him, thus reshaping the family of Abraham. But that shape of that family will be the question. In other words, and this is something we have talked about in the Gospels, but now we fully need to talk about it in the book of Acts. There's a difference in the Bible between being righteous or being saved and being in the family of Abraham, because it's the family member, and only the family member, who gets the inheritance of the family, which is resurrection. So who is resurrected becomes the question, who is in the family, not who is righteous. And number 5, how does one enter and remain in the family? This will be where we will finally meet the Apostle Paul. His ministry will be all about getting into the family and remaining in the family, and thus being able to inherit the resurrection that is promised the family. But again, these are questions yet to be answered. So let's now turn the page and read for tomorrow, Acts 1.